Hi, everyone. This is Lynne Hart with Invest St. Louis and Real Broker LLC. Today's video is on the Missouri special sale contract process and how to use that when you are writing a offer for an investor of some sort. Now, there's just a lot of different components that go into writing an offer. So until we know the exact situation and property, I certainly can't cover everything. So what we're going to do today is try to cover the most common scenarios. And then you're also going to kind of just see, you'll hear me kind of say which things are maybe optional or only apply in certain situations. So we've got the four most common contracts right here. And that is your special sale contract. That's what you make an offer on. Your special sale inspection rider. This is how you ensure that your client can have inspections and be able to negotiate as a result of them. If that's possible, if that's a possibility with the particular property that you're talking about. And then there's a rental property rider, typically used for, or really not typically, but used for when there is occupied rental property and it's used, you'll see, to extract data about the tenants and the building and the financials, as well as secure the right to walk through any apartments that maybe you didn't see in the first viewing. So, if it's a totally empty property, you wouldn't need a rental property rider. If there's even one tenant in there, you're going to want to use a rental property rider. So I'll show you the typical way that we use that. And then finally, if your client is using a financing contingency, they are likely going to need an appraisal rider. No bank is going to go forward without an appraisal. And I know that waiving appraisals is kind of what we have to do in the current climate to get a contract complete. But when you're writing an offer, you need to have your client's protection in mind. So even if they say that they want to waive an appraisal, but they're using a lender who's going to do the lender's going to do an appraisal, unless some lender decides not to do an appraisal, which that would be unusual. You're going to need an appraisal rider. So unless it is a cash offer, a truly cash offer, then you will not need that. Some other times you might not need it as if you were using hard money, but then you will be writing in probably some review, whatever the hard money lender requires, some ability for them to review the property themselves versus a formal appraisal. So this video is going to start right now, and we're going to start with a special sale contract. This is targeted at my team members, but it can be useful for everybody. I've put some fake data in here for the purpose of just demonstration, right? Oops, I was trying to make that big for you, and that backfired on me. So please do write questions in the comments and let me know what kind of questions you have. These forms can be found on any of your Missouri resources or St. Louis. These are St. Louis forms, St. Louis Association of Realtors forms, so you can find them through the Association of Realtor Relationships with whether it's zip forms or DocuSign or SkySlope. We've got those documents everywhere. Okay. So obvious maybe, but you're going to put the day that you're making the offer. When I did this, it was September 12th. And then you're going to put the name of the buyer. So if your seller is buying as an individual, you'll put their name. If they are buying in an LLC or corporation, then that's what you'll put here. And typically you would put, for example, Shelley Stoverink, a single person, right? Or if it is a married couple, you would put, Shelley Stoverink and Lynne Hart, a married couple, right? If that's what the situation was. Sometimes if you don't know, then you will have to find this out for title, but we can get that at a later time. So basically it's just the marital status. I'm sorry if that wasn't clear. It's marital status of anybody involved. If it's not a company, because Missouri has rights around and requirements around individuals buying property when they are married if both people aren't on title. So you really want to have that done. And then you're going to enter in your county, right? So, or I'm sorry, first the municipality. So when we're working in the city, the municipality is St. Louis. When you're working in the county, this is just the way our stuff works, the way we are organized here in the region. You're working in the county, your municipality would be Chesterfield, or Clayton, or wherever it is that you're buying. You'll see the municipality name. Then the county in the city, this county is named St. Louis City County, right? If this was in St. Louis County outside of the city limits, then the county is St. Louis. So important to know that so that you have the county right. And then you're going to put your address here. Right. And next, you have inclusions and exclusions. So again, this is a special sale contract. You'll notice on the residential sale contract, this is a way different scenario. This is targeting as is sales, etc. So a special sale contract is kind of the simplest version. It doesn't assume that an owner occupier is buying. When you look and compare it to the residential sale contract, you'll see a lot of things like refrigerators included, and they're assuming that it is an inhabited home or not an investment property. So there are reasons when you want a residential sale contract, and we'll talk about this when we get there. But right now, most multifamily building purchases require a special sale contract. So what we typically put when this is a rental property that's got tenants in it, we typically put all landlord property provided for tenant use, and we add at no value. Why? Because you learned in real estate class that we cannot convey property, not sell property in a real estate contract. They can leave it along, but there's no value to be associated for that. So we're asking here for anything the landlord owns that the tenants are using. Those are typically refrigerators and stoves and things. And typically sellers aren't taking that stuff, but it's a good idea to be clear. If there would be anything that you wish or your buyer wishes to have excluded, maybe there is personal property of the landlord that you wish to have cleaned out or removed from the premises, then you would put that here. I like to keep things simple with numbers, so that's why we're purchasing a building today on 123 Main Street at $100,000 with a 1% earnest money of $1,000. Typically, 1% is where you're going to want to go, right? It's going to be the best way, and most sellers are going to expect at least that much. An exception might be if you're buying on an FHA type of a loan where it's understood that the buyer may not have a lot of cash, but otherwise that's what you'll do. I list Elite Title Company for my buyers if they do not have a preferred title company and are willing to take my own title company. I'm sorry, I say it that way. My preferred title company. I do not own the title company. I personally have worked with the individuals at Elite for more than a decade and find them to be reliable and use them for my own properties. So they're a great fallback if your buyer does not have a preferred title company, and they do need to make that decision on their own. And then this is where they're going to give their earnest money. So within 3 business days. So if you're signing a contract on a Saturday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday is when they would have to have their earnest money turned in. And we'll talk about this, and we maybe have before. You need to manage this. Once you're under contract, you'll need to communicate when the 3 days is and ensure that your buyer submits that, and make sure that they understand if they do not submit it on time, they could be in breach of the contract and at risk of losing it, or a lot of other things could happen. It doesn't happen too often, but a lot of times buyers just don't pay attention to that. They don't think it's important. And so you'll find yourself best served by following up. On all of our contracts, we are going to put NA to anything that does not apply. So we're not going to be doing any additional earnest money. And so we've put NA in this entire section. Um, Method of financing, we're assuming there's financing on this example. If it was a cash offer, you would put not contingent upon financing. But so when you're contingent on financing, you need to know what kind of financing you are using. You will use your pre-approval to determine that. And then and the reason that you need to know that is the different loans work in different ways. They have different timelines. They have different requirements. And so you're going to need to know those. We're not going to go down through all of those right now. We're going to assume conventional mortgage, and primarily because FHA and VA loans, uh, I'm not going to say never, but generally won't work on a special sale contract, because usually with a special sale contract, the seller is not willing to do any work, and both of these loans, their appraisal process can result in conditions, and you just hate for anybody to go through this far in the contract, get a condition, and then find that the seller will not uphold that work. And usually it's very small work, but sellers, if they're not willing to do it, they're not willing to do it, right? So you don't need to get to loan commitment or the appraisal section to find out that you're not going to be able to make this deal work. We need to know that beforehand, before we ever write the offer. So in this case, I'm not going to do math on the screen, but when I wrote this originally, October 5th would have been 21 days from the day that I anticipated we might reach a contract. So if I was writing on September 12th, let's plan for a couple days of maybe back and forth. And then, okay, then I started counting probably from the 15th. You count the day after that day as day one, count out to 21. And that's the reason that I do 21 is because usually it's going to take a conventional loan 30 days to close. So my closing is going to be 30 days out, and my loan contingency, this is when the bank's going to tell us that we're clear, right? That needs to be about 7 days beforehand. So this is just a nice clean way to do that. So 21 days before. Then you're going to use on lines 54 through 58, you're going to use your pre-approval to determine the loan amount. So if they are paying 25% down payment, then it's a 75% loan amount. And you're going to put NA in the flat dollar amount, because nobody's ever going, well, it's very rare that we have somebody who's going to offer a down payment of a fixed amount, right? But it could happen. Your initial interest rate, typically I'm putting 7% right now in September here, but we could see 8%. So you need to know where interest rates are and have something that protects your buyer. So these are about protecting your buyer. If interest rates were to be raised, and this is a real thing now, and like say, for example, if you had a buyer who had a pre-approval thinking they were going to get a 5.75 or a 5% interest rate, and last week the federal government just raised the prime, now we're going to be seeing 6.75, 7%. We don't know what we're going to see yet. There's got to be a cap to that, where if that raise, let's say it went to 10%, your buyer doesn't want to continue anymore. So maybe you want to talk with them, what's the max interest rate, or put one that's relatively reasonable for the current time. And then you as buyer's agents need to stay in contact with your loan officers to find out what the typical interest rates would be at any given time, right? Especially in a time of change. Again, a conventional loan is almost always 30 years. Sometimes people choose a 15-year amortization. Here is what you want the contingency to be set for. So if they want a 15-year loan and they're unable to get one that meets those terms, all these terms, this is what gets them the ability to leave the contract without penalty. So you don't want to just slap 30 in there. If you want to know what their intentions are around the loan so that you can write this to protect them. So my X boxes are a little crooked here, right? But there's an X in conventional and an X in fixed rate. If you're using some other type of loan, then you would obviously check the right amount, right thing. If you were asking for seller to pay closing costs, you would X this box and you would fill this out. That rarely happens on an as-is sale contract. But if it did, I believe, well, I'm not even going to say the percentage, because you need to ask your loan officer what's the maximum amount that the buyer can receive in a seller credit at closing, or in seller paid closing costs, because there are maximums. So right now, that's not affecting us. Closing and possession, again, October 13th was probably 31 days, 30 days from when I believed I was writing this fake contract. And so this is the date of closing. We talked about in our recent presentation, you need to know before you start writing this, does the buyer have anything that would prevent them from closing roughly in the next 30 days? Are they planning travel? Are they planning to have lacking internet availability, etc., so that you can start the plan to closing as you're talking with them? And again, you're going to list on line 69 the name of the title company that you listed above. Then again, I have an X in the possession of property at closing. And so as soon as you are funded and closed, then you can give them access, right? Or if there is a certain time, then you could do that. But that rarely works because of everything that goes on at closing. So I don't see a lot of specific times. But there might be a cost, though, if you want to make sure like somebody's leaving at a certain time on a certain day and they need the keys before they leave. That might be a reason that you would write something like that in. Okay, so title and survey is somewhat kind of a routine section. Typically, the buyer is the one that's going to order and purchase title. Buyers choose to do this for themselves with their own title company rather than have the seller do that for them. Again, I should have mentioned this, but your buyer is initialing every single page here, so I should have mentioned that before. Again, here's an idea within the title. It's basically saying that 25 days after the acceptance deadline, if there's some defects, we have to identify them and do negotiate or leave the contract, right? You don't want to leave these blank. You definitely don't want to put NA. That would be a huge mistake here because that is basically waiving this for them, right? So if none are stated, it's 25. We're still going to state it because we don't want any questions about somebody filling in a blank after the contract was signed, right? So again, I'm not trying to train you on the entire contract or interpret it for you, but you should have read these contracts before you start writing them. And because you're going to need to know how to move around within the contract to achieve things for your clients and to protect them. This explains the earnest money, right? All the remedies, etc. Excuse me. And then again, more of this is written. It's not anything that we're going to modify. Special agreements, if you have some, you would write them in here. If you get to the point where you need to write a special agreement, please, especially if it's my client, please touch base with me first about what you're trying to accomplish, and I'll help you with the best way to accomplish it. So this is also your section for writers. And whenever you're going to be using a writer, you have to list it here or it is not attached to the contract. So it's not enough to include the writer but not have checked this box. So in this one, I was going to use a special sale inspection writer. We're going to do inspections. And I'm also going to use a rental property writer. We're going to assume that there are tenants in this building. And then we are on a conventional loan, so I'm using an appraisal writer. And you notice I have a typo there. Promise to continue being imperfect for you guys. So again, we're initialing these. And then we're going to talk about the seller's disclosure statement. We went through that in another video. You should have downloaded a seller's disclosure statement if it's provided. Most time it's going to be that no seller's disclosures is provided. If there is one though, even if it's one of those crossed out kind, they just say they've never lived there, then line 269, you would have read it and signed it. On the other hand, if you want to try, for some reason it makes sense that you would try to force the seller or request the seller provide you with a disclosure, you could check line 272. Most as is properties that are they're probably going to decline to do that. Um, but again, if you have something you're trying to achieve by wanting to do that, please contact me and we'll see how I can help you achieve whatever your goals are. So then we're back down to just the relationships and disclosures about agency. So in the MLS or from your listing agent, if for some reason it's not on the MLS, you are going to determine the listing agent what their role is. A lot of times it's dual agent, sometimes it might be seller's agent. I think it might be obvious, although I don't know why they have these boxes here. Might be a buyer's agent, right? If it's dual agent, that would be because you or I are also the listing agent, and so that could be the case. And then sometimes we see transaction brokers assisting sellers. So any of those as well. If anybody on the listing side that's licensed is involved in any way with the seller or an owner of the property, they are to disclose that, and these boxes are to be checked. You could ask them what to check or require them to fill it out themselves, but you want your buyer to see that. So you may want to find that out before sending this over to your buyer to complete. Now, this is about me, or if it's your deal, then it's you. I'm always a designated agent. How do we know that? We filled out a buyer's agency that said I was a designated agent, right? That's what your buyer's agency was saying. So we're a designated agent. And that is also why we always have to have that signed, is because we're performing in designated agent. And that's the way that Real wants us to interact. So if this were my property or I had some sort of a relationship with the transaction or the sellers, then I would fill this out as well for my behalf, right? And then finally, sources of compensation to the are, in this case, seller. I already told you I don't charge extra. I am going to look into my signature program and determine why all my X's are coming out on the left-hand side. I don't know if it was bad placement or what, but make sure if you're seeing this on yours that you get it into the box there. And again, we're going to initial here. And then I haven't done it because I don't have a listing agent in mind. But this section here, you would completely fill out. All of this information is on the MLS. It will get you a better relationship with your listing agent if you just have this all nice and filled out for them. You can pull my license. You should have my license maybe saved somewhere. My license, our firm's license. And so this would all be for me. You put my MLS ID here, my ID here, Real's ID here. I'll sign here and date here, and then we will have determined when we think we will have this signed by the buyer and have an appropriate, say, 24 hours after delivery for the seller to respond. And the exception to that would be a lot of times people are determining hey, submit by Monday and your acceptance deadline should be Tuesday at 5 p.m. If that's the case, then just fill that in, right? And then the same thing for the listing side, you're going to fill out all this information from them. You pull it right off of the MLS listing. And so that is the contract itself. Now let's go to the inspection rider. So when your buyer wants the right to do inspections of any sort, right? They don't have to be, I don't know why I have so much problem making this bigger. All right, let me focus for just a minute. Okay, maybe it'll work this way. There we go. Okay. I apologize. So this is your special sale contract. Whatever date you put on your special sale contract, you're going to put it on every place you see sale contract date. It's got to be the same date. Again, this is your same address, same buyer. assuming that your buyer is going to do full inspections, you're going to require that they have gas, electric, and water on. However, if it is an as-is sale that is unoccupied and they have indicated that the utilities are not on, you are not going to have much luck getting these turned on. So, you may want, if that's the case, before you fill this out, you may want to talk to the listing agent to see what can be turned on. And I would say you need to have water to be able to do a sewer inspection. You need to have electric to test things like HVACs, and gas, same thing. However, if you're buying an as is building, you need to be prepared that, or your buyer needs to be prepared that these may not be things that they are able to test. And so, why is that important? You could still try, you definitely could, but you don't want them to go into their inspection to find out that these utilities aren't on and the seller won't turn them on. You have the ability to find that out right now and write it into the contract in a way that's going to be acceptable. I have had sellers accept offers not noting that this was the case and also not be willing to get those things turned on. Even though they're under contract about it. It just gets really complicated. So it's just a lot easier if you verify those things before you write the offer, and or if you know it to be the case that the utilities are not on and won't be turned on, just make sure that your buyer knows that and that they understand that their inspector will only be able to review certain items without them being active. Um, Typical days to inspection that we would expect would be an average of 10. 7 is when we are trying to be kind of aggressive to keep the timeline tight, and we do have times when we need to do that. Sometimes I ask for 14 if there's like a holiday coming up. These are calendar days, not weekdays, even though inspectors really don't work too often on Saturday and Sunday. You need to manage your client and their inspections so that the minute after inspections or after a contract is accepted, they order their inspections and that they schedule them as early in those 10 days as possible. Sellers are more and more inflexible in this area and willing not to accept deals if they're going to have their property tied up. So keeping this as tight as is reasonable would be ideal. Then down here, basically, when you read this section, this is what happens if there is negotiation that happens after the inspection report. So basically, this section says that the buyer and seller have 10 days after the submission of the buyer's inspection notice. There are 10 calendar days that start ticking where they will get resolved and in agreement with each other, right? So you don't leave this blank, and you certainly do not put NA in this. That would absolve you of any negotiation here. And then again, you sign it, they'll sign it when they accept your offer. Next is the rental property rider. Again, this is only when you've got an occupied unit, or maybe, I do this every time, I don't know why that happens. Maybe it's an empty building but was recently rented, and so you might try to get some of this stuff from the seller, but generally speaking, only going to get it if it's occupied. The things that are checked are the things I typically check. Well, let's start up here. This section says that the seller has 5 days after we have an accepted contract to provide the documents, whatever we've all agreed to down here. And then after they have been received in completion, after all those documents have been complete, another 5-day counter starts where the buyer has 5 days to review and then notify of any issues or if they're going to terminate the contract. And then when we go here, if we just go through these, Schedule E is something off of the seller's tax from the last year, right? They may or may not. Typically, I find that they won't want to provide that. That's their tax documentation. They also, I rarely see an audited financial statement. With bigger buildings, this may be something that is more feasible, but with small multifamily apartment buildings, it's not happening very commonly in Missouri, nor is an accountant certified financial statement. And then more typically, we ask for all leases or rental agreements. We ask for a rental property verification form to be filled out. And that is basically the gross rents, the fixed expenses, and any sort of property management details. If you're buying a building bigger than 4 units, you may find that it doesn't come on this form, but the same information should come across because that form really plans on a 4 units, right? Not 16. But you're probably getting it in a bigger building. You're probably getting that information provided to you in a different way. So just make sure that you've received the information. Also, occupancy permits. So when a property manager has those occupancy permits, there's usually no issue to get them handed over or to go to the city of St. Louis and get them pulled. However, you should have your buyer expect that if there are long-term tenants or sometimes tenants that are been there longer than the ownership of the building, they may not have the occupancy permits. And I don't know how long the city of St. Louis holds those permits. I want to say something like 10 years. So you may not find all the occupancy permits, and I wouldn't freak out about that. The bottom line is somebody's been living there for 10 years, maybe you could call and get them to get a new occupancy permit or occupancy certificate, but you probably struggle with that, getting that to actually happen. And so you won't be doing many transactions if you go down that path. But if that does come up, again, give me a call. So finally, this is important too. These are two separate documents. And so what they are, rent roll is usually a summary. They might be rolled into one document in some cases, but a rent roll would be a summary of everybody in the building with their basic, like a one-liner showing their rents, their deposits, their lease end date, if they're delinquent or not delinquent, etc. Right? That's kind of what it is. The actual rent payment history for each unit for the last 12 months is a rental history file, or sometimes called tenant ledgers. And so basically this is going to give you the ability to see what building you're buying. Just because we see that there's rent that's being charged to people, it doesn't speak to the quality of the tenant. So if you look at 12 months and you can see that Jane Doe was late 6 of those months, maybe she's habitually late, but she stays caught up and doesn't run a balance, that might be okay. But if you see somebody who's delinquent or not delinquent, but you see that they go off and on and they pay the rent, they have to get, threatened of eviction, and they catch up, and a lot of behavior, your buyer may not be interested in that. Or, it's probably not the reason to break an entire deal. You might just want to consider that you may have a tenant that's not the best quality, and that you may find your seller or your buyer wanting to turn over as soon as they've closed. So the other thing that's important on this is that we did this like it was a 4-family. Let's say you've only viewed 1 unit because the other 3 are occupied. Well, this basically says that by whatever date you put here, that they are guaranteed to have the ability to walk through all the other units. Now, typically, people will do this with the inspection when the inspector goes through. So you only disturb tenants 1 time, maybe 2 with an appraisal. But if you are planning, or you know that your buyer, you need to talk to them. If the buyer is going to want to walk through all of the 4 units before they do their inspections, then you need to prepare that is the case, right? And you need to make sure that is clear, that you will not be purchasing your inspections until you have been given the access and walkthrough here in Section 5. And then we sign, right? And then the only other thing is very simple, is your appraisal writer. I'm just going to pull it up just so you can see it. But you basically fill in the address, you fill in the date. All of this is already written for you, and it just guarantees you, go read these sections. It just guarantees your buyer that if the appraisal that the bank does or whatever does not meet the purchase price, that they have options. And one option is terminating the contract. Another option is bringing cash to the closing table, and a third option is renegotiating with seller. Currently, and that may not state it be the case, but currently you're not really finding sellers who are willing to negotiate at appraisals. Some appraisals are starting to come in a little bit lower, but people are still writing contracts that waive their appraisal rider. So they just lean towards the people that are waiving those. So again, you only need this if you're using a loan or if your buyer wants it for other reasons. And that, my friends, is your special sale contract. Thanks so much. Please make your comments below. If you haven't already subscribed to the Invest St. Louis YouTube channel, please do it now. I hope that all my team members have subscribed. And all of you, I hope that you will leave me questions or comments below this video. So anything that's not clear, I can help with. And hopefully it's not too long. I know I tend to ramble on and leave too much detail, but I hope that you find it helpful. Thanks so much, and we'll talk soon.